All right, here we go. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode. This is actually episode 2 of the live feed here in the Shipley Swine group. We got a very special guest with us today, right here, Jim Heckel. This is our actual feed representative from Kalmbach Feeds. This is the man that does everything that we need from a feed standpoint. This is the guy I bug. I said, Jim, I need more feed. Very good, very smart man. He's been doing this lots of years. Jim, tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got started and what exactly you do here for Kalmbach Feeds.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. I think this is great you guys are doing these kind of seminars to try to reach people and help educate them further. Folks just can't always get away to go to seminars, so something like this.
So we're actually taking a seminar to them.
Exactly.
Jim is he's a specialist in swine. You handle all feeds, though, from my understanding, but you probably have a little stronger background with the swine, just kind of how you grew up and what you do at home.
This is more what I love to do. I still keep about 3 dozen sows of my own, so I enjoy this more than anything.
Definitely. So tell me then, what got you started, I guess, from a beginning standpoint of wanting to I guess, bring the feed to the people and how and what you do on a day-to-day basis as far as handling, if you're handling me, for instance, what is it exactly that you're doing for me and what should people know about Kalmbach Feeds?
Sure. I appreciate it. I've been in the feed industry now for 33 years. I've been with Kalmbach a little more than 4 years. This is a very fast-growing company. It's still a family-owned business, much like Shipley Swine. Started in 1963. It's currently under the management of the second generation, and the third generation has joined as well.
Wow. Yeah, family business.
Very much a family business.
I like that.
Approach everybody differently according to what their needs are. With this having been a breeding seed stock company here, you selling semen and bred gilts, your needs are different than the regular commercial hog operations or even the small feeder pig.
Guy that has, or the guy that's got a couple show pig sows and they feed pigs out for the fair. And from my understanding, you guys can handle all of that.
Yeah, we can.
From,
we can.
Like you said, the commercial guy to the breeder to, the feeder pig guy to the show pig guy. And that's what I love about using you guys so much is that you can handle everying. And
we appreciate that. Sure,
appreciate all the different stages and the nutritions and stuff. So I guess what we're going to talk about, guys, is we've got a bunch of questions here that were sent in to us. We got some really good questions. But just start off really basic here. Jim, tell me, why is it important that we feed a quality feed and we just don't go to a local, small time thing and just get your bag that says pig feed off the shelf? Tell me why is it important that we actually get a quality swine specific based feed?
Sure. You can go to about any store and you can pick up or a feed mill and get just a pig feed. When it comes to feeding breeding gilts or bred gilts, like what you guys are doing so many of now, their nutritional needs are much different than just any regular pig. So you kind of have to have something that's more specific to the needs of those sows and gilts as they develop. And so that's why we try to come up with different programs for them.
Gotcha. So you're telling me, and obviously, I know, but for the benefit of you guys, there's quite a bit of difference in feed, in a feed that we would feed a baby pig and a feed that we would feed a market hog-based pig or a feed that we would feed a breeding gilt or a breeding sow. So why is it important that we use different feeds for different stages of the pigs?
Sure.
And can you talk to that a little bit about why we need to be doing that?
When we look at, and we're going to talk specifically today more about bred gilts, and my apologies to any of you that have been doing this for a long time. This may be kind of remedial for you, but just in talking to Randy last week, over half the bred gilt orders he's gotten recently have come from new people. So if you've never done bred gilts and sows, this is a different world. And much like feeding show pigs is different than just feeding a pig to eat, it's the same way with handling sows. You've got to have the right nutrition delivered at the right time, and preferably in 2 different diets, one for gestating sows and one for lactating
Exactly.
sows.
That's actually my next question, Jim. Why is it important that we differentiate between, and then we're going to call this lactation feed and gestation feed, and just to kind of touch on the difference a little bit, the lactation feed is the feed that the sow is going to eat while she's in the farrowing house, while she's nursing, while she's lactating, while she's nursing. So that's going to be very different than the feed that we feed while she's still pregnant, while we're in the process of getting her bred, and we're going to refer to that as gestation feed. So tell us the difference between the gestation feed and the lactation feed, and why is that important that we differentiate between the two?
Sure. And before I get into that, I wanted to mention too that there is a sheet that you guys have put out.
And we will be uploading this live right onto the group when we're finished up here.
And this is an excellent sheet. It tells you how to treat both your gestating and your lactating sows. The gestating sow feed, for instance, is not something that's real high in protein or high in lysine. Our recommendation is something more in the long of a 12% protein that's going to be like a 7.7% lysine, where with the lactating sow, we're going to get that protein up around an 18. We're going to want a lysine level that's something over a 1. Ours figures out to a 1.15 actually. And then we're going to need the calcium and the phosphorus elevated in that lactating feed, because those baby pigs are pulling a lot out of her. If you actually measure the amount of milk that a sow's capable of putting out, especially if she's got a double-digit litter, she's actually equivalent to doing what a mid-lactation or late lactation dairy cow can put out.
That's a lot of milk.
So that's a lot of milk for a small animal.
And that's a lot of calories. People don't realize these sows, just to make the milk and to nurse the pigs, I mean, it looks like they're laying there doing nothing to, you know, the average person who walk in. But that's a lot of calories that those sows are basically burning. And so I guess my next question, Jim, is how many pounds of feed should we be feeding compared a pregnant sow compared to a sow that's already nursing her litter? Should we be feeding those different amounts of feed too?
Sure should. Not only is the diet's different, but the amounts you're going to feed is going to be different. You need to try to get somewhere in the 4 to 5 pound a day feeding regimen on those gestating sows. Now, things are going to change on factors of that, weather being one of them. If it's mild, you may get by fine with 4 pounds. If it's 20 degrees or colder, you may have to step up to 5 to hold her in good body condition.
And that's kind of what we preach to these people on the phone, you know, 4 pounds a day, 1 time a day even.
Correct.
Because we've had, you know, conversations with people that are feeding maybe 4 pounds a day, but they're going out and feeding 4 pounds a day at night too.
So they're really getting 8.
You know, guys, we're feeding, all of a sudden now we're feeding 8, and that's just too much. And then that's something we can dive in here a little bit too. But it's pretty important that we kind of limit feed those pregnant sows. And tell us, Jim, a little bit why is it important that we just don't put these sows on a full feeder and just get them, you know, big and fat?
Here's what's going to happen. Typically, the sow gets too fat. She has more difficulty having her pigs. My experience is a sow that's just a touch thin will actually do better than one that's definitely too fat. Now, I don't want her getting thin, but I'd rather have one that's just in good flesh. And that's it. And if you can get along with that, you'll be fine. The biggest mistake that I've heard of, I know you guys have had calls on this in years past. It's the very scenario you brought up. They're just feeding way too much.
Way too much. And guess what happens? If I feed my sow half the amount of feed, you know what I just did? I saved half the amount of money on my feed bill. That's right. I don't have to give you quite as much.
That's fine.
And I love that.
And that's fine. I want the sows to stay alive, and I want you to get live pigs.
Then sows make money, right?
That's correct. All right. That's correct. Then on the lactating sows, kind of the rule of thumb I always had was 4 pounds of feed for a sow and a pound for every pig she's got on her. Now, here again, that's going to depend on several factors. What was her body condition going in? How big is she? If she's a first-time female and she's got 12 pigs on her, she may not be able to eat that much.
That's a lot of feed.
It's a lot. And instead of just feeding AM and PM, you might have to try to feed 3 times a day. You may even have to wet the feed, make it more of a slop to try to get intake in a smaller meal, but do it more often. If she's a big old gal and you've had her around now for 8
we've got plenty of those sows around here.
Oh, golly, they can inhale a lot of feed.
That's my favorite kind of sow.
And they may not need that much. So you just kind of go by body condition once more.
And another thing, you know, we like to look at in the farrowing house too is, you know, these sows that are getting sucked dry because, you know, maybe they're a little bit older, you know, we keep our sows kind of thin anyway. And these sows have been nursed down so hard for 6, 7, 8 litters. And, you know, they might have started off a little thin just because we've been putting them to work, you know? Sure. You know, my rule of thumb is almost, you know, I give these sows as much feed as they can eat.
Pretty much.
You know, this is like the only time we can almost put these sows on a full feeder. You know,
if
we just let them eat.
Exactly.
You know, I want these sows to eat. So covered those pretty good. It says my sow. This is one of the questions from you guys here. So my sow's too thin when I weaned her. How much feed a day? And what's the best way, Jim, to get these sows back into condition here as we're going to get ready to start getting these bred again? Now, I know there's a difference here, and this is, you know, something we talked about with several different people. You know, whether we breed our sows twice a year or we breed our sows once a year. Here at our farm, you know, we breed our sows twice a year. The sows are going to have 2 litters. I like keeping the sows in use. It seems like it keeps everything going. It keeps, you know, the reproductive system moving along. it's something I like to do, and maybe that's something we could talk about. But I know there's lots of people that just don't have the means or the facilities, and they're just once a year they do their show pigs.
Yep.
You know, January, February, December, whenever it is time for them to do their show pigs, and then the sows get, 6 months off, and that's something I kind of blended off of this question a little bit. But talk to me a little bit here, and maybe we'll talk about both ways of doing it. But okay, so we weaned our sow today, and we're getting ready to put her out back in the breeding floor, and we're going to get ready to breed her again. So what's the best way to get our sows dried up and ready to breed, and how do we go about doing that?
Okay. One of the things I've done with sows, because I do mine the same way, I try to get 2 litters a year out of them, because I got a market for pigs year round. It's not just a club pig kind of a situation.
For sure.
What I've done is actually tried to separate those sows from the rest of the herd and the group that they were farrowed in, and I would leave them on lactation feed just because it's got higher protein, higher energy, try to build her back.
Yep.
And if possible, try to let her skip one heat cycle to get some more body condition on. Now, everyone's goals are different. If your sow came out and she was thin, but you're not going to worry about breeding her for 6 months, you got oodles of time, you could actually put her back on gestation feed and just give her maybe 5 pounds a day, and over time she will build back without getting fat. That's one of the biggest problems with the folks that only farrow once a year that I get the calls about. They tend to go stale, possibly even get cystic on them. That's another reason I try to get 2 litters a year no matter what. It just seems like physiologically they do better, but that's not for everybody.
I agree. I'm the same way. We breed our sows, and lots of times, Jim, we take them right out, we wean them, they come back in heat 4 or 5 days.
Correct.
Boom, we stick that breeding right in, we go right again.
Yep.
So maybe let's talk about that a little bit. For us, the way we do it, we try to keep these sows going. I mean, depending on time of year and when we wean, and there's lots of factors, but for the most part, for us, we get those sows out of the farrowing house, and boom, they're pregnant within the next week.
Pretty quick. Yep.
Pretty quick.
Yep. As long as you can keep them in good body condition and you don't have a lot of boss sows hurting those thinner ones, you're going to get along fine. I've bred sows back that were probably too thin, but as long as they could put enough condition on them, we got along excellent.
Yep. Well, and one thing we do here is we do everything in groups. So we put a group in a farrowing house. We take a group out of the farrowing house. We put that group in the same pen together. So we're talking, 8, 10, 12 pigs. We might call a few sows here and there. But for the most part, maybe we got a group of 10. We put that group of 10 in a pen, and just like you were talking about, every once in a while you get a boss sow in there. She pushes her way out. So this is, when we figure it out, we figure there's 10 sows in that pen. We're going to feed our sows 4 or 5 pounds a day. We're throwing 40, 50 pounds of feed in that pen. It's pretty easy for those boss sows to kind of push those other ones out of the way. And I know sometimes there's not much you can do about it, but it's important, guys. And one thing we do here, and I'm sure a lot of you are doing it too, if you ever find those sows, guys that do the groups like that, that are kind of falling behind, that maybe are getting pushed out of the way a little bit, we might have to make a separate pen for those.
That's correct.
I know that's something we do here. We might get a couple of the smaller sows and group them together, that way we can feed them a little separately. We can feed them a little bit more.
Here's another thing too, depending on the size of the group you got and the size of the pen, make sure you scatter the feed out a long distance. Because if you ever watch when you throw feed out in a line, that boss sow is going to stand vertical with the feed you just put in there, and she blocks them completely. She knows how to hold them back. But if you could make multiple piles or string it out a long way, it's a lot easier for those more timid ones to
Exactly. Eat. So like for what we do here, we have like a rectangle size pen, and the sows are in there, and just exactly like you said, the more we can spread that feed out and the more surface area we can give those sows to eat, we'll let those smaller ones catch up to the big ones, and those big ones, they can't force everybody, can they?
No, they can't.
They can't force everybody. Next question we got here, and this is something that we don't do here, but I'm sure you've heard. Is there any advantage to feeding, and I'm sure I'm not going to say this word exactly right, legume hay to sows and gilts? And maybe explain to me, because I don't know.
Okay.
Because that's not that we feed here. Tell us a bit about what legume hay is, and why or why not should we be feeding this to our sows and gilts?
I also work with folks in the non-GMO and organic world, and they will tend to feed things differently than what we do in more of the conventional show pig world. They're big on feeding hay, and when they talk about legume, they're typically talking about alfalfa. There can be an advantage to doing that, especially if you're on that one time a year farrowing deal. You want to try to bulk that feed up in the gestation diet. The issue you'll run into is, unless you're making this at home, you're probably not going to get a commercial feed mill for a variety of reasons willing to grind hay in the diet.
Sure.
And maybe the access to it isn't as good. It also creates a lot of fiber, which if the sows are in good shape, that'll help to keep them from getting fat. But it can also lower the energy in the diet. So if those sows are a tick too thin
already,
you're not going
to help out the thin sows at all.
No, it's not. If you do want to feed something like that and you've got someone making feed for you, or you don't have access to it, there's always alfalfa meal or alfalfa pellets. That's an option if you want to go that route.
So would this be a feed that would maybe like a little better in the summertime?
Quite possibly.
If we want to kind of thin our sows out for the summer when it's hot, and then in the wintertime, and like here we talked about the 4 and 5 pounds, we tend to feed a little heavier in the wintertime because it's cold, because the sows just need more calories to stay warm. So maybe this would be something that would be a little tougher to deal with, when the weather does get cold.
It would.
So say I got a litter, I've got some young gilts that are coming up, and I'm going to keep a couple of these gilts to breed for sows. We're not going to really show them at a county fair or a state fair or anything, but we just want to kind of develop these gilts into sows. What should I be doing here with some of these gilts that, we're just going to stick right in the sow herd and we're going to breed once they're old enough?
Sure. I see people that will raise them the same as they do their club pigs. They may, in fact, they may have even been club pigs. Maybe they were show gilts or something.
And that's something
like that.
maybe we can talk about the difference. I took my gilt to the county fair, and now on a breeder. Let's talk about the difference. This pig's just, we know she's going to be a brood sow one day. So it's, what do we need to be doing differently, I guess, between the two?
If you kept her at home, you never planned to show or anything, we can actually take the same show-based material that we use, that you do here at the farm, and we can make gilt diets for them. I don't recommend feeding just a regular market hog feed diet to them, because that's probably not going to be powerful enough to really help get them physiologically developed. It's more geared toward just making a market hog. Show feeds may be too costly to feed to something like that. So we kind of got to feed it out the whole time. We got to find something in between. Correct.
And just to give you guys kind of a reference point, how we do stuff here is, we sell a lot of bred gilts. We feed a lot of bred gilts. They all start as little open gilts, and they get fed in the barn with our market hogs. So kind of how we do things is our number is 250 pounds. So when our group of pigs reach 250 pounds, the Barras and maybe whatever gilts that we decided, aren't quite breeders, we're going to take those to market. And at 250 pounds is the point where we make our decision and say, okay, well, these gilts are going to stay. We're going to go ahead and breed them. And at 250 pounds, these are going to be the market hogs. They're going to go with the Barras. These are going to be the market gilts that, they end up on a truck and end up, in
a sizable herd like yours. You can certainly do that.
So I guess for the people at home, is there a magic number that we should say, once these pigs reach 150 pounds, 200 pounds, 300 pounds, what should we be doing different, from a market hog diet compared to, okay, now we're going to start breeding? For us, it's at 250.
Sure.
And maybe, that's just what works for us.
Sure.
With breeding gilts. That's kind of when we make our change, and our decision is, when this is going to be a breeding gilt, this is going to be a market hog gilt.
Sure. There's no magic number, but if you don't have a situation at your location like what you're used to here, Rick, I'd probably say about 180 would be where we would typically start making diets for them using a different premix than what you would for just market hogs.
Sure.
And then that helps to get them fully developed for what they need to be to become sows.
Of course. That's very good stuff. So let's talk a little bit. We're not going to touch into this too deep, but something that we do need to talk about a little bit. Medications in the feeds. What should we be looking for? Should we be feeding a medicated feed? And what do we need to be very mindful of, especially if we're going to be considering market hogs in our medicated feed?
The way I approach medications in anything, and even the same way in sow feeds, very seldom would you need something in the gestating side. You may occasionally want to use something like aeromycin at different points throughout the year to try to help clean up any possibility of lepto and this kind of thing that vaccinations didn't get. But on the lactating side, we've got some people using BMD to try to help pass that along in the milk to help reduce scour incidences.
Yeah, somebody being right here.
Yeah. I knew you were one of them that's
somebody
done that.
Being right here. We do feed that in the farrowing house.
And I approach this as kind of a synergistic thing between myself and whoever your veterinarian is. This is where I've had an agreement for a long time with veterinarians in my area. I'll work with the folks on the nutrition side. I'm going to refer those folks to you, the veterinarian, from the medical side. When it comes to these feed additives, that's something I think needs to be a collaborative effort, no different than injectables. So
what you're saying is if, you are on the same page, and of course, like one of our veterinarians on the same page, it would be a good idea if you can get your feed representative and your veterinarian and maybe have a group discussion and sit down if you're capable of doing that, or even just going back and forth. And that's something that we do a lot with our veterinarian and you, and we make sure everyone's on the same page, because our vet, needs to be knowing what we're feeding, and of course you do too. And that's something that's really important, especially, with when we're talking about market animals, this is stuff that's going to be meat consumption. So it's pretty important. And I know it's getting a little tougher these days, and rightfully so, is a lot of the packers, the consumers are really cutting down, on a lot of the medications that we can feed in the feeds. And, there's studies on top of studies on top of studies, which is nothing we're going to get into really deep here today. But it is pretty important that we stay on the up and up. That not only your feed representative, but your veterinarian and you yourself, as a hog producer, need to be extremely careful and extremely mindful when we're dealing with medications and, very specifically withdrawal times.
And you want to make sure this is something that's actually going to help you or try to address an issue you might have. None of this stuff's free. So if you can save some money at it too, by not needing it, that's what you do.
Exactly. Medications, they're not cheap to put in the feed.
Correct.
So, if we can keep everything healthy and on the up and
that's
up,
right.
they're not cheap. So kind of touch on a little bit like a standard health program. Talk to me a little bit about.
I would look at a health program much the same way as I do feed medications. I think it's specific to who you are and where your location is. If you're in a really hog dense area, it's probably more critical than if you're located somewhere where the next hog is 50 miles away.
Right.
And so it's going to be different. One of the frequent things I hear, and I'm sure you do with selling bred gilts all over the nation, there's pockets where they simply don't have veterinarians that maybe have a good protocol on what to do. And that's where down the road, I know one of your future sessions, you're wanting to get a veterinarian.
Yeah, we are going to sit down
here. That they can probably best answer that in any local given area.
For sure. Talked about the sows and the gilts and the breeding. I got a couple more questions. It's not exactly related to the gilts and the sows, but it's something that I want to talk about anyway. Especially now, this time of year, the corn's kind of starting to be harvested here shortly. So a lot of us are feeding corn that's been harvested 10 months ago, 11 months ago. Very important, any kind of pig that we're talking about, whether it's a baby pig, a lactating sow, a gestation sow. Anything, but as some of this corn sits in our bin for going on a year now, what can happen to that corn?
Yeah, the corn can relate to a variety of nutritional problems down the road, and part of it starts with intake. It doesn't matter if it's old corn or new corn. The thing you always have to be mindful of is there's three main issues I always hear about in corn every fall, and that's vomitoxin, aflatoxin, and zearalenone. And you'll know if you've got an issue with those. Vomitoxin is just pretty much a complete refusal to eat feed. Pigs can stand about 1 part per million in a ton of feed, and that's not very much.
You can't see that.
You can't see it. You may look at corn and it just looks absolutely beautiful, and a feeder could be clear full of feed and they'll act like it's empty. They don't want to eat it.
So basically what we're talking about is mold in the feed.
Correct.
Just to simple it down a little bit, some of the people, these are words that the average person, they're not going to know. So basically, guys, we're talking about mold in the feed. And sometimes can you possible to see mold a little bit, but most of the time you're not going to know what's there, are you? So, if we are a little suspect, we think we got a little bit of mold in the feed, what should we be doing? And
I would go to your feed supplier and ask them if they've had it tested. If they haven't, you need to try to get it tested. Like I said, those molds are the three most critical ones I look for, and different regions of the country may have any or all of them. In some years we have none at all. Those are the good years.
Those are the good years.
But you never,
a couple years ago where
we had
pretty rough, and we ended up having some trouble. And I know we sent batches and batches of corn and feed in through you guys and other labs, and it took us a little bit to get straightened out.
Yeah, it can be a real issue in some areas.
It can be a problem when you're feeding just a couple sows or a whole bunch of sows and a whole program. I mean, that can have quite a display, and stuff's so hard because say you have 1,000 bushels of corn in your bin, maybe only 50 of those bushels is actually affected by the mold, and it makes it awful hard to find sometimes. It can affect a whole batch of feed pretty easily.
It's a real issue to watch on that, and you have to be mindful of it every year. Those molds will all act different too. You can have the zearalenone mold that I talked about. The gilt sows will eat it just fine, but you'll notice their vulvas swell up enormously huge, like they're either in heat or they're ready to have pigs, and maybe they're 45 days bred. So that can be an issue.
Sure.
You have a variety of things that you have to be mindful of when you watch them and make sure the consumption's right and they're acting.
So the main thing is if you're a little suspect that you think you got something going on, I mean, we need to get
contact your feed rep.
Contact your feed rep. Worst case scenario, I know Kalmbach Feeds, we've sent in batches of corn at different times to you guys. You've helped us out a bunch. If you don't have a feed rep and you're just one of the guys who just goes and buys your feed, this guy right here, you need to get a hold of him and get you straightened out.
Depending on how far away you are, what I usually do is refer people to our website. I cover an area in southeast and southern Ohio and along the river in West Virginia. We have reps on the east side of the Mississippi, just about everywhere. We do send feed as far west as California.
Right, and then we had a lady in Oregon that would be interested. And guys, this is something that you can get. You can get these exact feeds. You guys custom made us the feed.
Correct.
What's that feed called? The Shipley?
We started out, we called it the Shipley sow premix, and it got to be very popular, and people were
we actually have lots of guys that are feeding that, don't we?
Correct.
Exact same feeds that we're feeding, you can get from this guy right here.
Correct.
If you want to get on the same playing field as we are, you can feed the same stuff. Kalmbach Feeds. Deal with Jim Heckle if you're local. If you're not, I'm sure, Jim, you could probably get them tuned on to somebody.
Sure can, or you can tune into our website as well. Just go to kalmbachfeeds.com and bring up a lot of the information there.
So got one that just came in here on a live feed. Jeff, he's got 2 Durocs. They're eating Kalmbach starter feed right now. We talked about the gilts a little bit. We're going to back this up a little bit here, and we wean the pigs. We got the feeds going on in the starter. Well, what should we be feeding next in a little bit? We got a little bit of time left. So we're on the Kalmbach starter feed. Where do we go from there?
Okay, from here you've got 2 choices. You can continue on an additional pellet program. If you go up to our website, if you don't have information on it, it will give the steps of pellets. We also have a grind and mix option, which you guys use here for your nursery pigs.
We do.
And that typically starts around 20 pounds of age.
Yep. So how we do it here, guys, is we got a pelleted feed, Kalmbach Feeds, as always, and we feed that to them for us probably the first 4 or 5 days up until a week. And we start mixing. After weaning. That's right. After weaning. So 4 or 5 days, they're on that pelleted feed right off the sow. And then we start blending that stuff in a little bit at a time. And then eventually, we just get them eating that ground feed. So after we get them out of the nursery, we can get them on different stages, and that's something that you guys can handle and everything.
And for Jeff here, if you've got a mill close by that can make the feed for you, and they make a small batch, depending on how many pigs you got, it works fine. If you're in a location where you can't get a grind and mix, you'd be ahead to have a pelleted product then.
Exactly. So if I lived in, the state of Illinois, which I'm sure is somewhere where you guys can get to me at, and I had a local feed mill that was willing to make my feed, so you can get me a couple bags of premix, and you can get me on a program, and I guess talk to me real quick. We're going to go back to basic again. Why is it important that we actually get with our feed rep and get a program developed instead of just feeding the same thing all the way through? And why should I be getting a guy like you to help me out?
Well, if you want to get maximum production, that's what you're going to do. Instead of just feeding 1 feed or 2 feeds to everything, there's different stages in the pig's life where they can be the most efficient. And it starts when they're small. They're more efficient when they're small than what they are when they're middle-sized than what they are when they're large. So if you can take advantage of that and keep their nutrition going along with their weight and age, the better off you're going to be.
That's pretty important stuff.
Yes, it is.
Guys like me, we feed lots and lots of pigs out, there's guys that feed a lot more than me. If I can take a week off, a week less time to get into 250 pounds, guess what I just did? I saved a bunch of money.
That's right.
If I can make these pigs grow at an optimal rate, that's pretty important.
It makes a difference. And something we didn't cover on the lactation feed, I know you guys have gotten lots of questions about, it's on your sheet here of what you hand to people, is having a laxative in the lactation feed.
That's important to me.
And you can have a variety of different things, which you've got listed here. The laxative that we use actually has a proprietary enzyme that nobody else has got. We've tested it on a number of pigs in a 2,400 sow unit, and we're consistently coming up with a ½ pound heavier pig at weaning.
That's big. That's big.
That goes out a long way when they're bigger.
Yeah, that's pretty big stuff. I got another question here right from the live feed from Jessica. If we ever get back, we're going to go back to the mold topic. If we ever get toxins, molds in our feed, what is your thoughts on adding am I going to say this right, bentonite clay into the mix to bind it to those toxins so the sows can excrete them?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, that's a good question, because the biggest thing I've run into in the last few years has been the vomitoxin mold. And those kind of binders will help. There's numerous types of binders out there. It also depends on the severity. I have had corn samples from people that just the corn itself tested as high as 9 parts per million of vomitoxin. I don't think I can put enough diluent in that to help you out. That makes a real challenge. If the corn itself is 1 or 2, by the time we blend the other ingredients with it and put a binder like that, it can be beneficial.
We can make it feasible, but sometimes, that corn is just so bad. And
I hate to tell you, but we've had guys with full bins of corn that couldn't feed it to hogs. The cattle can stand 10 parts per million. Chickens, they've tested that up to 50 parts per million.
They can take a lot.
If you got some chickens in your area.
I know there's a couple of years ago where the corn was really bad. And guess what? Those chicken farms, they got
a lot of
that bad corn, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
So, Jim, if someone was going to get a hold of you specifically, you might live in this Ohio Midwest type area, and if you like a guy like Jim and you want to get a hold of Jim, what's the best way? How can they get a hold of you and get started on the home feeding program?
The best way is to refer to our website at kalmbachfeeds.com. You can send an inquiry in there of any questions you have or someone specific to your area to help you out. We'll be glad to work with you. We're a growing company, been in business since 1963. The company has grown phenomenally in the last 20 years. We're feeding somewhere north of 25,000 sows in partnerships or full ownership now, too. On the commercial side, we're growing more all the time in the what I would call the club pig and the non-GMO, the niche markets that there are, and the handful of breeders like yourself that are still left across the nation. We're always interested in working with.
Yeah, guys, I'll tell you one story here real quick. We had another company making our feed prior to getting in talk. The pig numbers were down. We're having different problems, feet and leg problems actually, and some of the sows and gilts. We're having gilts and sows come up lame, limpy feet and stuff like that, and we're finding out that the ingredients maybe weren't good enough, and cheaper made feed products and different things like that. And I tell you one thing, getting switched over here, Jim got us fixed up, got us turned around. Having that quality feed, we kind of touched on it there a little bit ago. It's extremely important. Imagine how healthy you would be if you went and ate fast food all day long. Every day, that's all you ate. Sure, every once in a while that's probably okay. But if all you ate was different stuff like that, fast food compared to if you ate quality, nutrient dense, different foods, how much healthier the human body would be. Same thing applies to the different livestock and swine. It's extremely important that we got a high quality feed and a high quality nutrition program. Jim, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Jim's a guy that you're going to see him from time to time. Get used to seeing Jim here on the screen. We're going to be diving into different topics here. We're going to try to keep everything kind of related to the time of the year, that we're going to be dealing with. We're going to touch on all different kinds of topics. Guys, if you like seeing Jim on here, keep tuning in. We're going to keep bringing him back for you. Once again, thanks for taking time out of your day to watch us here in the Shipley Swine Group. Once again, thanks to Jim Heckel with Kalmbach Feeds. If you need a feeding program and you want Jim to be your guy, get a hold of Jim. I'm going to leave his contact information here at the bottom when we get all done here. Once again, thanks from the Shipley Swine Group. We sure appreciate all you guys. Once again, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.